The air in Harlem carried a pulse, a rhythm that thrummed through the cracked sidewalks, and the laughter spilling from brownstone stoops. It was a late summer evening in New York, the kind where the city seemed to exhale, softening its edges under a sky bruised with twilight. Victoria Kingsley stood at the edge of a community center courtyard, her hands dusted with chalk from the day's art class, her sunflower earrings catching the last glints of sunlight. She was 28, a woman whose presence was like a warm hearth, unassuming yet magnetic. Her laughter, a melody that lingered in the air long after she spoke. The center was alive with the hum of a charity event, a fundraiser for the children's art program Victoria had poured her heart into for years. Tables were draped in mismatched linens adorned with mason jars of wildflowers and flickering candles. Volunteers bustled carrying trays of lemonade and cornbread, while a jazz trio played softly in the corner, their notes weaving through the chatter like threads of silk. Victoria moved through the crowd with ease, her denim skirt swaying as she greeted parents-hugged children and adjusted a crooked banner with a gentle hand. Her world was this, a canvas of community painted with small acts of love. Across the courtyard, Logan Brooks stood out like a shadow in a painting too bright. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a jawline carved sharp enough to cut through the city's noise. His tailored navy suit was a stark contrast to the casual vibrancy around him, and his hazel eyes scanned the scene with a guarded curiosity. Logan was a billionaire, the CEO of Brooks Enterprises, a real estate empire that reshaped skylines from Manhattan to Miami. He was here not out of habit, but necessity, a public relations move to soften the edges of a recent scandal involving one of his company's developments. Yet, as he stood there holding a plastic cup of iced tea he hadn't sipped, he felt like a stranger in a world that seemed to breathe with purpose. Victoria noticed him first, not because of his wealth, she didn't know who he was, but because of the way he stood like a man who carried the weight of 1,000 decisions, but didn't know where to place them. She approached him, her smile soft but unguarded, her voice carrying the warmth of a summer porch. "You look like you could use a guide," she said, tilting her head. First time at one of these. Logan blinked, caught off guard by her directness. "Is it that obvious?" He replied, his voice low with a hint of a smile that hadn't fully formed. He brushed a hand through his dark hair, a gesture that betrayed his unease. Only a little, Victoria teased, her eyes twinkling. "Come on, let me show you what this place is about." She didn't wait for his permission, turning toward a table piled with children's artwork, vivid swirls of color, lopsided houses, and superheroes with oversized capes. Logan followed, drawn by her ease, her lack of pretense. She handed him a drawing, a child's rendering of a city skyline, with stars bursting above it. "This is Malik's," she said. "He's 7. Says he wants to build a city where everyone has a home." Sound familiar? Her question was playful, but it carried an edge, as if she sensed the man before her was tied to the world of steel and glass. Logan studied the drawing, his fingers tracing the crayon lines. "Sounds like he's got bigger dreams than most developers I know." He said, his tone quieter now, almost reverent. He looked up, meeting her gaze, and for a moment the noise of the courtyard faded. There was something in her eyes, brown deep like pools of earth after rain, that made him feel seen, not as a billionaire, but as a man. They talked as the evening unfolded, moving from the art table to a bench beneath a string of fairy lights. Victoria spoke of her students, of the way paintbrushes gave them courage, of the community center as a haven for dreams too big for Harlem's narrow streets. Logan listened, his usual guarded responses softening. He told her about his childhood in Connecticut, where his father's expectations loomed larger than the estates they built, and how he'd always wanted to create something that lasted beyond profit margins. His words came slowly at first, then spilled like water from a cracked dam. "You don't strike me as someone who stays still long," Victoria said, leaning back, her hands folded in her lap. "So why are you here, really?" "Not just for the press release." Logan chuckled, a sound that felt foreign to him. "You see through people, don't you?" He paused, then added, "I don't know. Maybe I needed to see something real for once." Victoria's smile was a quiet invitation. "Then stick around. Real doesn't hide here." The night stretched on, and Logan stayed. He helped carry crates of supplies, laughed when a child smeared paint on his sleeve, and found himself stealing glances at Victoria as she moved through the crowd, her presence a steady flame. When the event ended, she handed him a flyer for the next art class. "Come back," she said, her voice firm but kind. The kids could use someone who knows how to build things. He took the flyer, his fingers brushing hers, and nodded. "I will." The weeks that followed were a dance of chance and choice. Logan returned to the community center, not for headlines, but for her. He arrived in jeans and a flannel shirt, his suit traded for something that didn't scream wealth. Victoria noticed the change, but didn't comment, only handed him a paintbrush and pointed to a canvas. "Show me what you've got," she said, her grin a challenge. He was terrible at first, his lines stiff, his colors hesitant. But Victoria guided him, her hand steady over his, as she showed him how to blend hues, how to let the brush move like breath. Their conversations grew longer, spilling into late-night walks through Harlem's streets where neon signs buzzed and food carts scented the air with spices. She told him about her mother, Angela, who raised her alone after her father left, and her grandmother's gospel hymns that still echoed in her dreams. He shared stories of his mother, Eleanor, whose cold elegance hid a longing for connection and the pressure of a legacy he never fully chose. One evening, as they sat on a stoop eating empanadas from a nearby cart, Logan looked at her, his voice soft. "You make me want to be better, Victoria. Not just at painting, but at everything," she laughed, brushing crumbs from her skirt. "Careful, Logan. That sounds like a promise." "It is," he said, his eyes steady, and for the first time in years, he meant it. Their love grew like a painting, each stroke deliberate, each color a choice. Logan began to see Harlem through Victoria's eyes, a place of resilience, of stories etched in every brick. She saw his world too, the glittering penthouses and boardrooms, but she never let it overshadow her own. They were different, yet they fit like pieces of a mosaic that shouldn't work, but did. One night at a jazz club tucked beneath a subway line, Victoria sang. It was a spontaneous moment, urged by the band's pianist, an old friend. Her voice, rich and soulful, carried Sam Cooke's "A Change Is Gonna Come" through the smoky room. Logan sat at a small table. His drink untouched his heart, unraveling with every note. When she finished, the crowd erupted, but he only saw her. He stood across the room and took her hand. "You're incredible," he whispered, his voice thick with awe. She smiled, her breath still uneven from singing. "You're not so bad yourself." They kissed then, under the dim lights, the world narrowing to the warmth of their breath, the press of their hands. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a vow unspoken, but binding, that they'd build something together, something neither could create alone. As summer turned to fall, Logan found himself at the community center every weekend, helping with fundraisers, teaching kids to sketch blueprints and learning the names of every volunteer. Victoria's world became his anchor, her laughter, his compass. He began to dream not of skyscrapers, but of homes, places where families like hers could thrive. She saw the shift in him, the way his shoulders relaxed, the way his smiles came easier, and she let herself fall, not carelessly, but with intention, with trust. One evening as they walked through Central Park, the leaves crunching beneath their feet, Logan stopped by a fountain. The water caught the moonlight shimmering like liquid silver. He turned to her, his hands in his pockets, his expression nervous, but certain. "Victoria," he said, his voice a low hum. "You've changed me. This city, this life, it means nothing without you." She tilted her head, her eyes searching his. "What are you saying, Logan?" He pulled a small canvas from his bag, a painting he'd done himself, a skyline of Harlem, with a single sunflower glowing at its heart. Tucked within the petals was a ring simple but radiant, a diamond catching the light. "Will you be my home?" he asked, his voice trembling with hope. Victoria's breath caught her hand, flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, not from doubt, but from the weight of love so fierce it felt like a miracle. She nodded, whispering, "Yes, Logan. Yes." They embraced the fountain's song, blending with their laughter, their tears. The park seemed to hold its breath, as if the city itself was witnessing the birth of something sacred. But love, even the truest, carries shadows. Victoria's family, while warm, held reservations. Her mother Angela pulled her aside one evening, her voice gentle but firm. "He's from a different world, baby. Money like that, it changes people." "Are you sure?" Victoria nodded, her heart steady. "I'm sure of him, Mama. Not his money, but him." Angela sighed, brushing a braid from Victoria's face. "Then I'll pray for you both." As the stars blinked above Victoria and Logan stood together, hands entwined, unaware of the storm waiting just beyond the horizon, a storm born not of malice, but of misunderstanding of bodies and hearts that sometimes speak in languages the other cannot hear. Have you ever met someone who saw you, truly saw you, and made the world feel possible again? Drop spark in the comments if you believe in the magic of a single moment, because sometimes one encounter can rewrite your entire story. Part 2. The Vow and the Shadow. The Brooklyn church stood like a sentinel of time, its red brick walls worn smooth by decades of prayers and promises. On a crisp October evening, the air was thick with the scent of magnolias and anticipation, the golden hour draping the city in a glow that felt like a blessing. Inside, stained glass windows cast kaleidoscopes of color across the pews, and the choir's voices rose in a hymn that seemed to cradle the very soul of the room. Victoria Kingsley stood at the threshold of the sanctuary, her ivory gown trailing behind her like a whisper of dreams. She wore no veil, only her natural crown of braids, adorned with tiny pearls that caught the light. Her heart beat steady, a rhythm of certainty, as she prepared to walk toward Logan Brooks, the man who had become her horizon. Logan stood at the altar, his navy suit tailored to perfection, but it was his eyes, hazel, vulnerable, brimming with love, that held the room. He adjusted his cuffs, a nervous habit, his breath catching as the organ swelled. The choir sang, "Great is thy faithfulness," their voices weaving a tapestry of hope and devotion. Victoria's cousin Simone led the solo, her voice soaring like a prayer, answered while her uncles clapped softly in the back, their rhythm a heartbeat of family. Angela, Victoria's mother, sat in the front pew, her hands clasped a tissue tucked beneath her sleeve. She smiled through tears, her pride as radiant as her daughter's glow. When Victoria appeared, the room seemed to still. Her gown, off the shoulder with lace, hand-stitched by her mother, was simple yet luminous, a reflection of her spirit. Logan's knees wavered, his breath stolen by the sight of her. She walked down the aisle. Her steps measured, her eyes locked on his. The choir's song rose a crescendo that mirrored the swell in her chest. She mouthed, "I'm here." And Logan's lips curved into a trembling smile, his eyes glistening. He wiped them with the back of his hand, unashamed of the emotion spilling over. They joined hands, her fingers warm against his, and the vows began. "I, Victoria Kingsley," she said, her voice clear as a bell, "promise to love you in the quiet spaces, to hold you through the storms, to build a home where our hearts can rest." Logan's voice followed, steady but thick with feeling. "I, Logan Brooks, vow to walk with you, to listen when words fail, to make every sunrise a promise kept." The pastor's words sealed their union, and when he said, "You may kiss your bride," they didn't just kiss. They clung as if the world could wait. The crowd erupted. Petals rained from the hands of Victoria's nieces, and someone passed cornbread drizzled with honey before they even left the church. The reception unfolded in a rooftop garden in Manhattan, a blend of Victoria's warmth and Logan's elegance. String lights twinkled like stars, and the DJ spun a mix of Nina Simone and Otis Redding, the music weaving through laughter and clinking glasses. Guests feasted on smoked brisket, collard greens, and peach cobbler, a nod to Victoria's roots, while champagne flowed for Logan's colleagues. Victoria's best friend Lena gave a toast that brought tears, speaking of love that bends but never breaks. Logan's brother Ethan handed out sparklers, their glow dancing in the night. Victoria pulled Logan aside at one point, her hand in his. "I don't want this night to end," she whispered, her eyes reflecting the city's lights. He leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "It doesn't have to." The guest suite at the Plaza Hotel was a haven of soft light and quiet luxury, tucked away from the city's pulse. Logan carried Victoria across the threshold, her laughter bright as she swatted his shoulder. "Put me down before you hurt yourself," she teased, her voice a melody of joy. He set her on a velvet chaise, her heels slipping off as she exhaled the weight of the day, settling into something tender. The room was adorned with magnolia petals scattered on the bed, a jazz playlist humming low through a speaker, and a tray of chocolate-dipped strawberries untouched on the nightstand. Logan knelt before her, taking her hand. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft, searching. Victoria nodded, but a flutter stirred within her. Not nerves, not doubt, but something unnamed, a quiet ripple beneath her skin. She brushed it aside, smiling. "I'm perfect," she said, leaning to kiss his forehead. "Just overwhelmed." He stood, pulling her gently to her feet, and they moved to the bed, the ribbons of her gown loosening under his careful fingers. The candles flickered, casting shadows that danced like promises. Logan's hands were tender, his kisses slow, each one a vow renewed. "You're beautiful," he murmured, his lips grazing her neck. Victoria wanted to lose herself in him, to let the moment carry her. But as his hands brushed her waist, pulling her closer, a sharp twinge pierced her abdomen. She stiffened, her breath catching, her jaw tightening against the sudden discomfort. Logan paused, his eyes searching hers. "Victoria," his voice was laced with concern. "I'm fine," she said quickly, too quickly, forcing a smile. "Just a long day." She tried to relax, to lean into his warmth, but the pain returned sharper, deeper, a signal her body understood, but her mind could not yet name. She pressed a hand to his chest. "Wait," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I just need a minute." He nodded, his brow furrowed, but he didn't push. Of course, he said, his voice gentle, but tinged with something else, confusion perhaps, or hurt. He lay beside her silent, his body close, but not touching. Victoria turned to the window, the city's lights blurring through the sting in her eyes. She wanted to explain, to tell him it wasn't him, that her body had betrayed her in a way she didn't understand. But the words wouldn't come. Shame curled in her throat, heavy as stone. She slipped into her robe, tying it loosely, and stepped into the bathroom. The mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized, her braids loose, her eyes wide with unspoken fear. She sat on the edge of the tub, her hands trembling, and let the tears fall. "I didn't mean to push you away," she whispered to the tiles, her voice breaking. Her mother had told her intimacy was sacred, a dance of trust. But what if her body refused to move? What if pain drowned out love? She thought of the women in her family, their stories of ease and connection, and wondered why hers felt so different. When she returned, Logan had turned away his back, a silent wall. She climbed into bed, whispering, "I love you." But the room swallowed her words. The silence was heavier than sleep, a chasm growing where closeness should have been. By dawn, the suite was bathed in pale light, the curtains swaying in a breeze that felt too gentle for the weight in Victoria's chest. She stirred, reaching for Logan, but the sheets beside her were cold. Her heart lurched. She sat up, her eyes scanning the room. His suitcase was gone. His jacket, once draped over the armchair, was missing. Only the faint scent of his cologne, cedar and citrus, lingered on the pillow, a ghost of the night before. On the dresser, a note folded neatly, his handwriting sharp and deliberate. "Victoria, I'm sorry. I don't know what last night meant. Maybe I rushed us. Maybe you've changed your mind. I need space to clear my head. I love you more than you know." Logan. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the edge of the bed, the paper trembling in her hands. The words blurred through her tears. No warning, no fight, just absence. Had she pushed him away? Was her hesitation a rejection he couldn't bear? She clutched the note to her chest, as if it could warm the chill spreading through her. The city outside roared on indifferent, while the suite, dressed in petals and untouched champagne flutes, mocked her with its untouched joy. Victoria's phone lay silent on the nightstand. She reached for it, scrolling through their messages, their photos, moments of laughter, of promises whispered under Central Park's trees. She dialed his number, her heart pounding, but it went to voicemail. "Logan," she said, her voice steady despite the ache. "Please don't shut me out. I don't know what you're thinking, but I need to talk. Please." She hung up, waiting, but the silence grew louder. She stepped onto the balcony, the city sprawling below, a maze of dreams and heartbreak. The note slipped from her fingers, caught by the wind, fluttering down to the streets below. She didn't chase it. "If you loved me," she whispered, "you would have stayed to ask." But he hadn't, and now she stood alone, the weight of his absence heavier than his presence had ever been. In that moment, Victoria didn't know the truth. Her body held a life stirring within her, a secret born in the pain she couldn't name. She only knew the ache, the questions, the love that still burned despite the void. And as the sun rose, painting the skyline gold, she wiped her tears, her bare feet firm on the cold floor, and whispered, "I'm still here." Part 3. The Wedding and the Tremor. The Brooklyn church stood as a monument to time, its red brick facade, softened by ivy that clung like whispered secrets. On that October evening, the air was heavy with the scent of magnolias and the promise of forever, the golden hour casting a halo over the city. Inside, stained glass windows painted the pews with fractals of crimson and sapphire, and the choir's voices rose in a hymn that felt like a heartbeat pulsing with faith and love. Victoria Kingsley stood at the church's threshold, her ivory gown a cascade of silk and lace, hand-stitched by her mother Angela, with a tenderness that wove family into every seam. Her braids were adorned with delicate pearls, a crown of her heritage, and her eyes shimmered with a certainty that could quiet storms. Logan Brooks waited at the altar, his navy suit impeccable, but it was his hazel eyes, raw, unguarded, brimming with devotion that held the room captive. His hands fidgeted with his cuffs, a nervous tick, betraying the calm he tried to project. The organs swelled, and the choir sang, "Great is thy faithfulness," their voices weaving a tapestry of hope that seemed to lift the very rafters. Victoria's cousin Simone led the solo, her voice soaring like a prayer that had already been answered, while her uncles clapped softly in the back, their rhythm a quiet pulse of kinship. Angela sat in the front pew, her hands clasped around a tissue, her smile radiant through tears of pride and quiet worry. When Victoria stepped into the aisle, the world seemed to pause. Her gown, off the shoulder and luminous, was a reflection of her spirit, simple yet profound, elegant yet grounded. Logan's breath caught his knees trembling, as if the weight of her beauty might undo him. She walked toward him, her steps deliberate, her eyes locked on his, a silent vow in every glance. The choir's song rose a crescendo that mirrored the swell in her heart, and she mouthed, "I'm here," her lips curving into a smile that steadied him. Logan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, unashamed of the tears that spilled. They joined hands, her fingers warm and sure against his, and the vows began. "I, Victoria Kingsley," she said, her voice clear as a bell, ringing across a still morning, "promise to love you in the silences, to hold you through the unknown, to build a home where our souls can rest." Logan's voice followed, steady but thick with emotion. "I, Logan Brooks, vow to walk beside you, to listen when words falter, to make every dawn a promise kept." The pastor's blessing sealed their union, and when he said, "You may kiss your bride," they didn't just kiss, they clung as if time could wait for them. The crowd erupted, petals rained from the hands of Victoria's nieces, and someone passed a basket of cornbread, drizzled with honey, a taste of home shared before they even left the sanctuary. The reception unfolded on a Manhattan rooftop, a garden of dreams suspended above the city's pulse. String lights twinkled like stars, and the DJ wove a spell with Nina Simone's velvet tones and Sam Cooke's soulful croon. Tables were laden with smoked brisket, collard greens, and peach cobbler, a nod to Victoria's roots, while champagne flutes sparkled for Logan's colleagues. Victoria's best friend Lena gave a toast that wove laughter and tears, speaking of love that bends but never breaks. Logan's brother Ethan handed out sparklers, their glow dancing in the night like fireflies. Victoria pulled Logan aside at one point, her hand in his, her eyes reflecting the city's lights. "This feels like a dream," she whispered, her voice soft as a prayer. He leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "It's real, Victoria, and it's ours." The guest suite at the Plaza Hotel was a sanctuary of soft light and quiet luxury, a haven carved from the city's chaos. Logan carried Victoria across the threshold, her laughter bright as she swatted his shoulder playfully. "Put me down before you hurt yourself." She teased, her voice a melody that echoed in the stillness. He set her on a velvet chaise, her heels slipping off as she exhaled the weight of the day, settling into something tender, sacred. The room was adorned with magnolia petals scattered across the bed, a jazz playlist humming low through a speaker, and a tray of chocolate-dipped strawberries untouched on the nightstand, their sweetness waiting for a moment yet to come. Logan knelt before her, taking her hand, his eyes searching hers. You okay? He asked, his voice a low hum laced with care. Victoria nodded, her smile, warm but fleeting, for a flutter stirred within her. Not the butterflies of love, but something deeper, unnamed, a ripple beneath her skin that she couldn't place. She brushed it aside, leaning to kiss his forehead. I'm perfect, she said, her voice steady despite the quiet tremor in her chest. Just overwhelmed by you. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet, and they moved to the bed, the ribbons of her gown loosening under his careful fingers. The candles flickered, casting shadows that danced like promises across the walls. Logan's hands were tender, his kisses slow, each one a vow renewed in the quiet. You're beautiful, he murmured, his lips grazing the curve of her neck, his voice thick with reverence. Victoria wanted to lose herself in him, to let the moment carry her into the tide of their love. But as his hands brushed her waist, pulling her closer, a sharp twinge pierced her abdomen, sudden and unyielding. She stiffened, her breath catching her jaw, tightening against the discomfort that bloomed where warmth should have been. Logan paused, his eyes searching hers, concern flickering in their hazel depths. Victoria. His voice was soft but urgent, his hand stilling on her skin. I'm fine, she said quickly, too quickly, forcing a smile that felt fragile as glass. Just a long day. She tried to relax, to lean into his warmth, to let the love they'd built carry her past the pain. But it returned, sharper, deeper, a signal her body understood, but her mind could not yet name. She pressed a hand to his chest, her touch gentle but firm. Wait, she whispered, her voice barely audible, trembling with a fear she didn't understand. I just need a minute. He nodded, his brow furrowed, his hand retreating as if her words had burned him. Of course, he said, his voice gentle but threaded with something else. Confusion, perhaps, or a quiet hurt that he didn't voice. He lay beside her, his body close, but not touching the space between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Victoria turned to the window, the city's lights blurring through the sting in her eyes. She wanted to explain, to tell him it wasn't him, that her body had betrayed her in a way she couldn't comprehend. But the words stayed trapped, caught in the shame curling in her throat, heavy as stone. She slipped into her robe, tying it loosely, and stepped into the bathroom, the door clicking shut behind her. The mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized, her braids loose, her eyes wide with unspoken fear, her hands trembling as they gripped the edge of the sink. She sat on the tub's edge, her breath uneven, and let the tears fall silent, but searing. I didn't mean to push you away, she whispered to the cold tiles, her voice breaking. Her mother's stories of intimacy had been woven with joy, a sacred dance of trust, but hers felt like a misstep, a rhythm she couldn't find. What if her body refused to love the way her heart did? What if pain drowned out passion? When she returned, Logan had turned away, his back, a silent wall, his breath even but distant. She climbed into bed, whispering, I love you. But the room swallowed her words, leaving only the weight of silence. The candles burned low, their light flickering like a heartbeat, fading into the night. Part 4. The Absence and the Echo. Dawn crept into the plaza suite, like a thief stealing the warmth of the night before. The curtains swayed in a breeze too gentle for the weight in Victoria Kingsley's chest, the city's first light casting pale fingers across the room. She stirred her hand, reaching instinctively for Logan, but the sheets beside her were cold, untouched, as if he'd never been there at all. Her heart lurched, a sharp ache, blooming where hope had rested just hours before. She sat up, her eyes scanning the suite, searching for traces of him. His jacket, his suitcase, the quiet strength of his presence. But the armchair was bare, the closet empty, and only the faint scent of his cologne cedar and citrus lingered on the pillow, a ghost of the man who had vowed to stay. On the dresser, a note folded with precision, his handwriting sharp and deliberate, like a wound carefully inflicted. Victoria, I'm sorry. I don't know what last night meant. Maybe I rushed us. Maybe you've changed your mind. I need space to clear my head. I love you more than you know. Logan. The words blurred through her tears, each one a splinter in her heart. She sank to the edge of the bed, the paper trembling in her hands, her breath uneven as the truth settled like frost. No warning, no argument, just absence of void where there forever was meant to begin. Victoria clutched the note to her chest, as if it could warm the chill spreading through her. Had she pushed him away? Was her hesitation, her unexplained pain, a rejection he couldn't bear? She replayed the night, the way her body had faltered, when her heart had yearned to open the way. She'd smiled through the discomfort, hoping he wouldn't notice. But he had, and now he was gone, leaving only questions in his wake. Was she not enough? Had her silence spoken louder than her love? The suite, still adorned with magnolia petals and untouched champagne flutes, mocked her with its untouched joy, a stage set for a celebration that had crumbled before it began. She rose, her bare feet cold against the hardwood, and stepped onto the balcony, the city sprawling below like a map of dreams and heartbreak. The note slipped from her fingers, caught by the wind, fluttering down to the streets below, a fragile confession, lost to the city's pulse. If you loved me, she whispered, her voice breaking, you would have stayed to ask. But he hadn't, and the weight of his absence pressed heavier than his presence ever had, a silence louder than the vows they'd spoken. Her phone lay on the nightstand, a silent sentinel. She reached for it, scrolling through their messages, their photos. Moments of laughter in Central Park. Quiet evenings in Harlem, promises whispered under starlit skies. Her thumb hovered over his name, her heart pounding as she dialed. The call went to voicemail, his voice steady, professional, a stranger's tone. Logan, she said, her voice steady despite the ache. Please don't shut me out. I don't know what you're thinking, but I need to talk. Please. She hung up, waiting, her eyes fixed on the screen, as if it might glow with answers. Minutes stretched into hours, but the silence grew louder, a chasm where hope had once lived. In Chicago, Logan Brooks sat in his penthouse, the city's skyline a cold constellation beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The room was stark, all glass and steel, a reflection of the life he'd built, one of power, precision, and solitude. He hadn't slept, his mind replaying the night before, the way Victoria's body had stiffened under his touch, the way her eyes had flickered with something he couldn't name. Fear, pain, rejection. He'd lain beside her, silent, his heart a tangle of confusion and hurt, until the weight of it drove him from the bed, from the room, from her. He hadn't meant to leave forever. The note was meant as a pause, a plea for clarity, but as he sat in his office chair, the city's hum distant and hollow, he wondered if he'd broken something irreparable. His phone buzzed on the desk, Victoria's name lighting the screen, once, twice, 3 times. Each call was a knife, each voicemail a wound. He listened to her message, her voice soft but steady, pleading for a chance to talk. His thumb hovered over the call button, but he couldn't press it. What if she confirmed his fears? What if she'd married him out of momentum, not love? What if her hesitation was her heart's way of retreating? Logan's mother, Eleanor, had called that morning, her voice sharp through the phone. You rushed into this, Logan, a girl from Harlem. Your father would have never approved. Her words, cold as the marble in her Connecticut estate, echoed the doubts he'd buried during his months with Victoria. He'd fought for their love, defied his family's expectations. But now, in the silence of her withdrawal, those doubts resurfaced, clawing at him. He wrote a message. "Do you still love me? Did I misread us?" But deleted it, the words too raw, too vulnerable. Instead, he buried himself in work, signing contracts, reviewing blueprints, anything to drown the ache in his chest. Back in New York, Victoria moved through the suite like a ghost, her wedding gown folded neatly at the foot of the bed, its pristine silk a mockery of the chaos within her. She didn't eat, didn't shower, just sat in her robe, clutching the ring, still on her finger, the one Logan had hidden in a painting, his proposal, a canvas of love and intention. She traced its edges, remembering his words. "Every sunset is beautiful, because it reminds me of you." But this sunrise felt like betrayal, an unfinished goodbye that left her stranded. She tried calling again, her voice softer now, less certain. "Logan, I'm not mad. I just want to understand. Please call me." No response. She sent a text. "I miss you. Can we talk?" The screen stayed dark. She paced the suite, her bare feet, brushing the rug, her phone a lifeline that refused to hum. She drafted messages she never sent. "I'm sorry if I ruined us. I was scared, and I didn't know why." Each one deleted, erased by the fear that her voice was no longer welcome. The city outside moved on its rhythm, unbroken. But inside the suite, time stood still. Victoria sat on the bed, her hands folded in her lap, the ring heavy on her finger. She whispered, "It wasn't rejection, Logan. I just didn't know what was happening to me." But the words dissolved into the air unanswered, and the truth her body held, a life stirring within her, born in the pain of that night, remained a secret even to her. In Chicago, Logan stood on his balcony, the wind sharp against his skin, the city's lights a blur of cold stars. He thought of Victoria's laughter, the way she'd painted stars on his palms with chalk, the way she'd sung in that jazz club, her voice unraveling him. He opened his phone, scrolling through their photos, a picnic in Central Park, a sketch she'd drawn of their dream home, her smile glowing in the sunlight. He saved one. Her eyes closed, her face tilted toward the sky, and named the folder. Maybe. But he didn't call, didn't text, letting the silence grow where understanding should have been. Victoria returned to her Harlem apartment that evening, the key turning in the lock with a sound that felt final. She dropped her bag on the floor, the space small, but hers filled with crooked paintings and the scent of lavender candles. She knocked on her mother's door just blocks away, and when Angela opened it, no questions were needed. Victoria stepped into her arms, her body trembling, and sank into the hug, like it was the only thing holding her together. They sat on the couch, gospel music playing softly, Angela's hand smoothing her daughter's braids. "I think I broke us," Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible. Angela rocked her gently, her voice a steady anchor. "You didn't break anything that was real, baby. You're still here, and that's enough." Victoria cried quiet tears that carried the weight of a love, paused a vow, tested a future uncertain. But beneath her grief, her body whispered a truth she couldn't yet hear, a life growing, a miracle, waiting to be known, a spark kindled in the silence of a night that had changed everything. Part 5. The Miracle Within. The Harlem Community Center pulsed with the quiet chaos of creation, its walls painted in vibrant blues and yellows that seemed to hum with hope. Victoria Kingsley stood at the back of the multi-purpose room, her clipboard balanced against her hip, her sunflower earrings catching the morning light filtering through the windows. 3 days had passed since Logan Brooks had left his note, a wound that still bled in her chest, but she moved through her work with a determination that felt like defiance. At 28, she was a woman whose strength was woven from the threads of her community, her students' laughter, her mother's prayers, the steady rhythm of a life she refused to let unravel. The room buzzed with volunteers preparing for the weekly art class, their voices a soft chorus over the clatter of paint cans and the shuffle of paper. Victoria directed them with a calm authority, her voice steady despite the ache that lingered in her bones. "Keep the watercolors on the right," she called, adjusting a stack of canvases. "We don't want the kids mixing them with the acrylics again." Her smile was practiced a mask to hide the storm within, but her eyes, deep and brown like earth, after a rain betrayed a flicker of fragility. She hadn't slept well since the wedding night. The memory of Logan's absence a weight heavier than the ring still on her finger. She'd called him twice more, left messages that echoed with quiet desperation. But his silence was a wall she couldn't breach. The suite at the plaza had been a dream, turned to ash, its magnolia petals, and untouched champagne flutes, a cruel reminder of promises unkept. Yet here in the heart of Harlem, surrounded by the laughter of children and the warmth of her people, Victoria found a thread of resilience, thin but unbroken. It was mid-morning when the first wave hit her. She was arranging paintbrushes when a sudden lurch in her stomach stole her breath, a nausea so fierce it felt like the world had tilted. Her vision blurred the edges of the room, softening into a haze, and she gripped the table, her knuckles paling. The smell of paint, usually a comfort, turned her stomach, mingling with the faint sweetness of juice boxes on the counter. "You okay, Vic? A volunteer?" Jamal asked, his brow furrowed, as he paused with a stack of paper. She waved him off, forcing a smile. "Just need a second," she said, her voice thinner than she intended. But the wave returned stronger, pulling her toward the staff restroom with an urgency she couldn't ignore. She locked the door behind her, the click loud in the small space, and sank to her knees before the toilet. Her body surged, emptying itself in a rush of confusion and exhaustion, her hands trembling as they braced against the cool tiles. She leaned back, her forehead resting against the wall, her breath ragged. This wasn't grief, not the hollow ache of Logan's departure. This was something else, something alive stirring in her core. Deep down, she knew. The truth had been whispering since the wedding night, hidden in the twinge that had stopped her in Logan's arms, a signal her body had understood before her mind could catch up. She rose, her legs unsteady, and opened the cabinet beneath the sink. Tucked behind a basket of travel toiletries and unopened bath bombs was a box she'd bought months ago, a precaution she'd nearly forgotten. Her hands shook as she peeled it open, the instructions familiar, yet foreign, each word heavy with possibility. She followed them, her movements mechanical, her heart a drumbeat in her chest. The wait was eternal, the seconds stretching like hours. The test lay on the counter, its window blank, at first a single pink line stark against the white. Then slowly a second line appeared, bold, undeniable, a declaration of life. Victoria sat back against the wall, the test clutched in her hand, her lips parting, but no sound escaping. Pregnant. She was pregnant. The word landed softly, a spark in the darkness, and tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of awe. Logan's child conceived in a night of love and pain, a miracle born from a moment she'd thought had broken them. She pressed the test to her chest, whispering, "You're real." The bathroom was silent, but it wasn't lonely anymore. It was sacred, a space where loss and life met, where heartbreak gave way to hope. She sat there curled on the tiles, her arms around her knees. The test a holy secret she wasn't ready to share. Logan was gone. His absence a wound still raw. But this child was a presence that stayed a gift she hadn't expected, but already cherished. Victoria returned to her apartment that evening. The Harlem streets alive, with the hum of dusk food carts, sizzling children, laughing, the distant wail of a saxophone. Her small space, with its crooked paintings and lavender-scented candles, felt different now, as if it held her secret in its walls. She sat at her kitchen table, a glass of orange juice half full beside her, and let her thoughts drift to the wedding night. The candles, Logan's tender kisses, the sharp jolt that had made her flinch. She'd thought it was her body's betrayal, a failure of intimacy. Now she knew it was the beginning of something else, a life taking root, a whisper of creation in the quiet soil of her womb. She touched her stomach, no bump yet, no flutter, but she felt it, a presence as real as the ring on her finger. "You were here all along," she whispered, her voice trembling with love. The tears came again, but they were different now, woven with reverence, with the weight of a future she hadn't planned, but would embrace. She wasn't alone, not anymore. This child, this spark was hers to carry a light in the shadow Logan had left. The next morning, she walked to her mother's apartment just blocks away, the autumn air, crisp against her skin. Angela opened the door, her eyes narrowing at the sight of Victoria's pale face. "Baby, you look like you haven't eaten in days," she said, pulling her inside. The kitchen smelled of sage and simmering soup, a comfort that grounded Victoria's trembling heart. They sat at the table, Angela stirring a pot on the stove, her humming soft as a lullaby. "I'm not sick, Mama," Victoria said, her voice steady but soft. She took a breath, the words heavy on her tongue. "I'm pregnant." Angela froze, the spoon still in her hand, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and wonder. "What did you just say?" she asked, turning slowly. Victoria pulled the test from her purse, sealed in a small Ziploc bag, and slid it across the table. "Proof," she said, her lips trembling, but her gaze unwavering. Angela's eyes watered as she looked at the 2 pink lines, her breath catching. "Lord have mercy," she whispered, her hands pressing against the table as if to steady herself. "Logan," Victoria nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "He doesn't know. He left before I even felt it." Angela circled the table, her arms enveloping Victoria in a hug that felt like home, her face buried in her daughter's shoulder. "Baby, this child is a blessing," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're not alone in this. You never will be." Victoria's shoulders relaxed. The weight of her secret shared, her tears falling freely now. The room was quiet, the soup simmering softly, and for the first time since Logan's departure, she felt anchored, held by the love that had always carried her through. The news spread slowly, a ripple through the tight-knit web of her family. That Sunday, Victoria hosted a small gathering at her apartment, not a celebration, but a quiet claiming of her new reality. Pink streamers draped the windows and black balloons bobbed near the ceiling, not for sorrow, but for the unexpected beauty of life's surprises. Her cousins brought sweet tea and laughter, her aunties casseroles and gentle questions, her uncles soft nods of approval. Pastor Ray stopped by, his Bible tucked under his arm, and blessed the apartment with a prayer that felt like a shield. "This child is not a mistake," he said, holding Victoria's hands, his eyes kind but firm. "This child is your strength." Victoria stood in the center of it all, her voice rising above the chatter. "Yes, I'm pregnant," she said, her tone steady, her presence unyielding. "And no, he's not here, but I am, and so is this child." The room erupted in cheers, her grandmother kissing her cheeks, her niece pressing a tiny pink bow into her palm. The love wrapped around her like a quilt, stitching her heart back together, thread by thread. She began to sing again soft hums, while folding laundry lullabies in the grocery store aisles. Her body was changing subtle shifts she felt but couldn't yet see, but her soul was transforming faster. Her students noticed their paintings, now featuring glowing mothers and babies in strollers, their laughter a mirror of her growing hope. One boy, Darius, handed her a drawing, a woman with wings holding a child. "This is you, Miss Victoria," he said, his grin wide. "And your baby." She smiled, tucking the drawing into her sketchbook. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft with gratitude. Every step became a prayer, every choice, what she ate, how she rested, a devotion to the life within her. Logan's absence still ached, a bruise she couldn't ignore, but it was softening, replaced by the quiet certainty of her purpose. At night, she stood on her balcony, the Harlem skyline, a canvas of lights and shadows. She rested a hand on her stomach, whispering, "Your daddy doesn't know you yet, but I do. You'll never feel abandoned." A tear slipped down her cheek, not from pain, but from reverence. This child was her anchor, her miracle, her reason to rise. Part 6. Building anew. The Harlem streets hummed with the rhythm of early winter, their breath visible in the crisp air, the sidewalks dusted with the first hints of frost. Victoria Kingsley moved through her days with a quiet strength, her apartment a sanctuary of soft peach curtains and framed sketches she'd painted herself. At 28, she was learning to carry a new kind of weight, not just the life growing within her, but the resolve to build a future on her own terms. The community center remained her haven, its colorful walls a testament to the dreams she nurtured both for her students and the child she now called Noah. Logan Brooks had vanished into silence, his absence a shadow that lingered, but no longer consumed her. Victoria had tried reaching him one last time, a message sent into the void. "I hope you're okay. I'm not mad, just sad. I wish you'd ask what happened." When the response never came, she deleted his contact, not in anger, but in release her heart, choosing peace over pursuit. Her apartment, once a place of quiet longing, now buzzed with expectation. Onesies folded in neat stacks, a rocking chair in the corner, a nursery taking shape where dreams of Logan had once lived. She began writing letters to Noah, each one a conversation folded into a shoebox beneath the crib. "Dear Noah," she wrote one evening, her pen moving across the page as candlelight flickered. "You don't know me yet, but I already love you. Your father has kind eyes and a laugh that could light up a room. I don't know where he is now, but you are here, and that's enough." Each letter ended the same. "No matter what happens, you were always wanted." The words were her anchor, a way to speak the truths she couldn't yet voice aloud, a promise that Noah would know her heart, her strength, her story. Victoria's days were filled with purpose. At the community center, she guided her students with a patience that felt sacred, letting their messy brushstrokes and wild colors mirror the chaos and beauty of life. "Make it bold," she'd say, her voice warm, as she knelt beside a girl painting a lopsided sun. "The world needs your light." The children noticed her changing body, their questions innocent and bright. "Miss Victoria, your belly's getting big." A girl named Aisha giggled, her hands covered in paint. Victoria smiled, resting a hand on her stomach. "There's a new artist in here. Might be better than me." They laughed, guessing names, touching her belly with gentle hands. When she allowed their curiosity, a reminder that love could be simple, unburdened by the complexities of adults. At night, she played gospel music, swaying in her socks, her movements slow but deliberate. She spoke to Noah as if he were already in her arms, telling him about the world, about courage, about the colors she'd teach him to paint. Sometimes, mid-sentence tears would fall, not from sorrow, but from fullness, from the overwhelming love for a child she hadn't yet met. Her family was her fortress. Angela came by weekly, bringing soup and stories, her presence a steady hand through the uncertainty. "You're stronger than you know," she'd say, brushing a braid from Victoria's face. Her cousins filled the apartment with laughter, her aunties with casseroles, her uncles with quiet nods that spoke louder than words. The community center, too, became a second home, its volunteers a chorus of support. When a co-worker whispered about Victoria's single motherhood, their words sharp with judgment, she met their gaze with a calm defiance. "This child is my choice," she said, her voice steady, and the whispers faded, replaced by respect. Victoria's body was changing, a slow unfolding of life. The flutters came first, like paper shifting beneath her ribs, then small kicks, playful and sure. She'd pause in the studio, her paintbrush hovering, and smile. "You like that color, huh?" She'd whisper, her hand resting where Noah moved. The ache of Logan's absence was still there, a bruise that throbbed in quiet moments, but it no longer defined her. She was building something new, a life woven from love and resilience, a home where Noah would never know abandonment. In Chicago, Logan Brooks moved through his days like a man underwater, his penthouse, a sterile cage of glass and steel. The city's skyline, once a symbol of his ambition, now felt like a mirror of his isolation. He buried himself in work, closing deals, signing contracts, meeting with investors. But the motions were hollow, a distraction from the void Victoria had left. His mother Eleanor called often, her voice a blade of expectation. "You're better off," she'd said when he told her of the separation, her tone cold. She wasn't built for our world. But Logan knew it was he who hadn't been built for hers, for the warmth and honesty she'd offered so freely. At night, he lay awake, the ceiling a blank canvas for his regrets. He thought of Victoria's porch where they'd laughed under string lights, of the jazz club where her voice had unraveled him, of the sketch she'd drawn of their dream home, a modest brownstone with a garden for their future. He opened his phone, scrolling through their photos, pausing on one of her, smiling, her eyes closed, the sun kissing her cheek. He saved it to a folder named Maybe, a quiet hope he couldn't voice. One evening at a Chicago art gallery, opening a rare break from his routine, Logan stopped before a painting. It was a vibrant swirl of color, a Harlem street scene, alive with movement, signed V. Kingsley. His breath caught the world, narrowing to the canvas. He saw her in every brushstroke, her passion, her heart. The gallery owner mentioned her name in passing, unaware of the storm it unleashed. "Victoria Kingsley's work is making waves in New York," she said. "She's expecting, a real inspiration." Logan nodded, his throat tight, and left without another word. The drive back to his penthouse was silent, the city's lights blurring through his thoughts. Victoria was pregnant. The word landed like a stone, stirring questions he hadn't dared ask. Was it his? Had she known that night? Why hadn't she told him? The doubts swirled, but beneath them was a truth he couldn't ignore. He'd left without asking, without listening, without staying to understand. He wrote a message that night, his fingers trembling over the screen. "Victoria, I heard about the baby. I'm sorry I wasn't there. Can we talk?" But he deleted it, the words too small for the weight of his regret. Instead, he booked a flight to New York, not knowing what he'd say, only that he needed to see her, to face the silence he'd created. In Harlem, Victoria stood at her balcony one evening, the winter air sharp against her skin, the skyline a tapestry of lights and shadows. She wore an oversized sweater, Her hand resting on the gentle curve of her belly, Noah's kicks a quiet rhythm beneath her touch. She thought of Logan not with longing, but with a quiet curiosity. Where was he now? Did he carry the same ache she'd once held? She'd stopped waiting for his call. Stopped checking her phone. But a part of her wondered if he'd ever know the truth, that the night he'd thought had broken them had created something sacred. She returned to her sketchbook, her hands moving with purpose, drawing a woman standing under a starry sky, a child cradled in her arms. The lines were bold, the colors vibrant, a reflection of the strength she'd found. She wasn't the woman who'd cried in the plaza's bathroom questioning her worth. She was Victoria Kingsley, mother, artist, survivor, building a home, not from what was lost, but from what remained. Her students sensed the change, their paintings brighter, their stories bolder. One afternoon, a girl named Maya handed her a drawing, a family under a tree, the mother glowing with wings. "That's you, Miss Victoria," she said, her eyes wide. "You're gonna be the best mom." Victoria smiled, her heart full, and tucked the drawing beside Darius's winged mother, a collection of love growing in her sketchbook. At church, she no longer sat in the back, hiding her grief. She stood in the front pew, her belly visible, her hands lifted in praise. When whispers came, curious, sometimes sharp, she met them with a steady gaze, her child, a badge of grace, not shame. Her pastor, Ray, pulled her aside one Sunday, his voice gentle. "You're walking a path not everyone understands," he said, "but it's yours, and it's holy." Victoria nodded, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "I know," she whispered, her hand resting on Noah. "We're enough." That night, she wrote another letter to her son, the words flowing like a river. "Noah, your father once called me his home, but you're my foundation. I'll build a world where you always feel seen, always feel loved." She closed the shoebox, her fingers lingering on its edges, and stepped onto the balcony once more. The stars above Harlem were faint, but steady, a reminder that light could thrive in even the darkest places. Part 7. The Return and the Reckoning. The Harlem Community Center glowed under the soft November light, its walls a canvas of hope painted in blues and yellows. Victoria Kingsley stood near a table cluttered with paintbrushes and half-finished canvases, her hands steady as she guided a group of children through an art project. At 28, she carried a quiet strength, her sunflower earrings catching the light as she moved her belly, gently rounded beneath a loose sweater. Noah, the life growing within her, was a secret she'd shared only with her closest kin, a miracle that anchored her through the storm of Logan Brooks's absence. The ache of his departure lingered, a bruise, softened by time. But her world had expanded, woven from the love of her family, her students, and the child she'd soon hold. The center hummed with life, children's laughter, the clatter of paint cans, the low murmur of volunteers planning the winter fundraiser. Victoria's voice was warm, but firm, as she directed a boy to blend his colors more boldly. "Don't hold back, Malik," she said, kneeling beside him. "Your heart's in this. Let it show." Her own heart, once fractured by Logan's note, and silence, had begun to heal, stitched together by the rhythm of her days and the promise of Noah's kicks beneath her ribs. It was late afternoon when the door creaked open, a sound so ordinary it barely registered. But something in the air shifted a stillness that made Victoria pause, her hand hovering over a jar of brushes. She turned, and there he was. Logan Brooks, standing in the doorway, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. He was leaner than she remembered, his hazel eyes heavy with something unspoken, his navy coat dusted with the first flakes of snow. In his arms he held a small box, its edges worn as if he'd carried it too long. Victoria's breath caught her heart, a drumbeat echoing the past. She didn't move, didn't speak, only stared, her eyes unwavering as they met his. Noah stirred within her, a gentle flutter, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Logan took a step forward, his expression a tangle of regret and resolve, his voice low when he finally spoke. "Victoria." He said the words soft, almost a plea. "Can we talk?" The room seemed to hold its breath, the children's chatter fading into a distant hum. Victoria adjusted Noah's weight on her hip, though he was still unborn, her hand resting protectively over her belly. She nodded once, motioning to a chair by the window, far from the intimacy of the couch, where they'd once shared dreams. "Sit," she said, her voice steady but cool, a boundary drawn in the space between them. Logan sat, the box still in his hands, his posture tense as if bracing for judgment. Victoria stood across from him, her arms crossed, her gaze unyielding. "I heard about the baby," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A friend from the gallery mentioned it. I didn't know." Her lips parted, but she didn't soften. "His name is Noah," she said, her tone deliberate, claiming the truth for herself. "And you weren't here to know." Logan swallowed, his eyes glassy, his fingers tightening around the box. "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "I panicked, Victoria. That night when you pulled away, I thought you didn't want me, that I'd pushed too far, or that you'd changed your mind about us. I was afraid of hearing you say it, so I left before you could." Her jaw tightened, the memory of that night flooding back, the candles, the pain, the silence that had grown where love should have thrived. "You didn't ask," she said, her voice low but sharp, cutting through the air. "You wrote a note and walked away. You didn't give me a chance to explain." Logan's head bowed, his hands trembling as he set the box on the table. "I know," he whispered. "I was wrong. I let my fears, my mother's voice, the pressure of my world cloud everything. I thought I was protecting myself, but I broke us instead." Victoria's eyes burned, not with tears, but with a fire she'd nurtured in his absence. "I was in pain, Logan," she said, her voice steady despite the ache. "Physically. Something in my body didn't feel right, and I didn't know how to say it. I wasn't rejecting you. I was scared, and I needed you to stay, to ask to listen. But you chose silence." He nodded, his tears falling freely now, tracing paths down his cheeks. "I should have stayed," he said, his voice raw. "I should have asked. I've spent every day since, regretting it, replaying that night, wondering what I missed." She studied him, the man who'd once been her home, now a stranger kneeling before the life they'd created. "What are you here for, Logan?" She asked her question, not an accusation, but a demand for truth. Not why you left, not where you've been. "What do you want now?" He looked up, his eyes meeting hers, searching for a way back. "I want to know him," he said, his voice trembling but certain. "Noah. I want to be part of his life if you'll let me. I don't expect forgiveness, not yet, but I want to earn it for him." Victoria's heart tightened, a mix of grief and grace stirring within her. She didn't answer immediately, her silence a space for the truth to settle. Noah kicked again, a reminder of the life she carried, the future she was building. "You can meet him," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "But you earn that right, Logan. Not with words, not with promises. With time, with presence." He nodded, relief flickering in his eyes, though her boundaries held firm. "I understand," he said, his voice steady now. "I'll show up, Victoria. For him." She didn't offer him water, didn't ask about his journey, didn't soften the space between them. She stood adjusting her sweater and returned to the children. Her presence, a quiet declaration that she was whole without him. Logan watched the box still on the table, its contents a mystery he didn't dare reveal yet. He rose his steps hesitant and left the center, the door clicking softly behind him. Victoria stood by the window that evening, the Harlem skyline, a tapestry of lights against the winter dusk. She touched her belly, Yoa's movements a steady rhythm, and whispered, "He's here, baby. But you and I were enough." The ache of Logan's return was sharp, not because she longed for him, but because it stirred the past, picking at a wound that had begun to heal. She didn't know what his presence meant, only that she would protect the life she'd built, the love she carried, no matter who walked through her door. In Chicago, Logan sat in his penthouse, the city's lights cold and distant. The box he'd carried sat unopened on his desk, a collection of sketches Victoria had given him. Her dreams. Their dreams drawn in vibrant hues. He traced the lines of a Harlem brownstone, a garden blooming in its yard, and felt the weight of what he'd lost. He'd come to New York not to reclaim her, but to face himself, to confront the man who'd run from love, because he feared its failure. Now he had a chance, not for her heart, not yet, but for Noah's, and he would not let it slip away. Victoria returned to her apartment, her steps steady on the hardwood floor. She lit a lavender candle, its scent curling through the air, and opened her sketchbook. She drew her hands moving with purpose. A woman standing under a starry sky, a child in her arms, her face turned toward the light. The lines were bold, the colors alive, a testament to the strength she'd found in solitude. She wasn't the woman who'd cried in the plaza's bathroom questioning her worth. She was Victoria Kingsley, mother, artist, survivor, and no one, not even Logan, could dim her light. Part 8. The Path to Peace. The Harlem winter settled softly, its chill softened by the warmth of community. The streets alive with the glow of holiday lights and the hum of shared stories. Victoria Kingsley's apartment was a haven of quiet intention, its peach curtains catching the morning light. The nursery, a tapestry of love, framed sketches, a rocking chair, a crib, where dreams of Noah rested. At 28, Victoria had become a pillar, her strength forged in the crucible of loss and love, her heart anchored by the child she carried and the life she'd built without Logan Brooks. Noah's kicks were stronger now, a rhythm of life that steadied her through the uncertainty of Logan's return. The community center remained her sanctuary, its walls a canvas of hope where her students painted their futures. Victoria moved through her days with purpose, her sunflower earrings a quiet nod to the joy she'd reclaimed. She taught with a patience that felt sacred, guiding her students to express their hearts in bold strokes and vibrant colors. "Don't be afraid to make a mess," she'd say, her voice warm, as she knelt beside a girl painting a lopsided star. The best art comes from courage. Her own courage had grown rooted in the letters she wrote to Noah stored in a shoebox beneath the crib, each one a vow that he would know love, no matter the shape it took. Logan's return had been a tremor, not a storm. He came to the center twice a week, his presence tentative but steady, his navy coat traded for a sweater that softened his edges. He didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't demand a place in her life. Instead, he showed up carrying a diaper bag he'd bought after reading parenting books, his hands awkward but gentle as he learned to fold onesies or clean paintbrushes after class. Victoria watched, not from longing, but from curiosity, wondering if the man who'd once fled could become the father Noah deserved. One Tuesday evening, as snow dusted the Harlem streets, Logan arrived early, his breath visible in the cold. He carried a small book, a collection of children's stories Victoria had once mentioned, and sat in the corner reading to a group of students while she organized supplies. His voice was soft but steady, the words weaving a spell that quieted the room. Victoria paused her hand on a jar of paint and watched her heart stirring with a mix of grace and caution. He wasn't the man who'd left a note and walked away. He was trying, and that effort, small as it was, spoke louder than promises. When Noah was born, the hospital room was a cocoon of quiet strength, the hum of machines a distant lullaby. Victoria lay propped on pillows, her gown loose, her braids spilling over her shoulders. Angela sat beside her, clutching her hand, whispering prayers as contractions rolled through Victoria's body like waves. The pain was fierce, a roar that tested her will, but she met it with a resolve that felt divine. "You're doing this, baby," Angela said, brushing her damp hair back. "You were made for this." Victoria gripped the sheets, her breath loud, her eyes fluttering shut. Flashes danced behind her lids. Logan's smile in Central Park, the night they'd danced under porch lights, the first flutter of Noah's kick. Each contraction was a step toward her son, a journey from pain to purpose. The doctor nodded, her voice calm. "It's time." Victoria pushed her scream, a primal hymn, and when Noah's cry filled the room, loud, strong, whole, she broke, tears streaming as her body sagged, her heart racing. The nurse placed Noah on her chest, his warmth a miracle against her skin. Victoria looked down, tracing his features, tiny eyebrows, eyelids like petals, lips pursed as if holding secrets. She saw Logan in the slant of his nose, the softness of his chin, a presence that stirred both memory and resolve. "You're here," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "Noah, you're my peace." Angela leaned over her eyes, wet with reverence. "He's perfect," she said, her fingers grazing his tiny hand. "You did this, Victoria. You brought him home." Logan learned of Noah's birth through a mutual friend, a call that stopped his world. He arrived in Harlem 2 days later, his steps hesitant as he knocked on the community center's door. Victoria was there. Noah cradled in her arms, his small form swaddled in a quilt her aunt had sewn. She opened the door, her expression calm but guarded, and stepped aside. "Come in," she said, motioning to the chair by the window, the same boundary she'd set before. Logan sat, his eyes fixed on Noah, his breath uneven. "He's beautiful," he said, his voice thick with awe. "He looks like you." Sometimes, Victoria said, her tone steady, but mostly, "He looks like peace." Logan reached out, then paused, his hand hovering. "May I?" he asked, his eyes pleading. She nodded, her movements slow, and handed Noah to him, her arms lingering as if to protect her son from the past. Logan held him gently, his hands trembling, Noah's tiny fingers curling around his thumb. "I missed everything," Logan whispered, tears falling. "Every kick, every moment. I deserve that." Victoria's silence was her answer, a space for truth to settle. She didn't offer comfort, didn't ease his guilt. "You'll meet him," she said. "You'll earn that right. But not me, Logan. Not yet. Maybe not ever." He nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I'm not here to replace what was," he said, his voice low. "I'm here to protect what came from it." She handed him a folded letter, worn at the edges, written in the weeks after he'd left. "Read it when you're alone," she said. "It's not for now. It's for you to understand." Logan took it, holding it like a fragile promise, and left, the door clicking softly behind him. Victoria kissed Noah's cheek, whispering, "You're still my beginning." Over the weeks, Logan became a quiet presence, not demanding, but consistent. He came on Tuesdays and Thursdays, bringing snacks Noah would one day love, learning to change diapers with awkward hands, humming jazz tunes as he washed bottles. Victoria watched, her heart, a balance of caution and wonder. Could someone who'd once fled become dependable? He fumbled, forgetting wipes once, struggling with diaper straps, but he never raised his voice, never pushed her boundaries. His presence was a question, not an answer, and she let it sit unanswered. One snowy evening, Noah was restless, his gums swollen, his cheeks flushed. Victoria rocked him, her lullabies soft, but ineffective. Logan took him, cradling him gently, and read from the storybook, his voice a steady anchor. Noah's eyes widened, his fussing stilled, his tiny fingers curling around Logan's collar. Victoria leaned against the wall, her arms crossed, her heart caught between tears and a smile. "You're safe, little man," Logan whispered, laying Noah in the crib, covering him with the green quilt. Victoria's throat tightened, not from grief, but from grace. She didn't need Logan to complete her, but Noah deserved a father, and Logan was trying. They painted together one afternoon a mural they'd planned long ago, a Harlem street alive with color, a child running under a starry sky. Logan reached for her hand, a casual gesture, but she eased it back gently. "I see you trying," she said, "but this isn't about us. It's about him." "I know," Logan said, his voice steady. "I'm not saying never. I'm saying I'll wait." Victoria nodded, her eyes holding his. "That's a good start." Malik's first birthday was a quiet affair, balloons sagging against the walls, cake crumbs scattered on the table. Logan stayed after the guests left, his shoulders hunched, as he sat at the dining table. "Can I say something?" he asked, his voice soft. Victoria paused, nodding. "Go ahead." I was afraid, he began, his eyes on the floor. "Not just of being a husband, but of being seen. I thought you'd see my flaws and leave, so I left first. Pride was my shield and silence my escape. But Noah, he changed that. One look and I knew I didn't want to be that man anymore." His voice trembled. "You deserved assurance, not abandonment." Victoria stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Thank you for saying that," she said, "and for changing, not just apologizing." They sat on the porch later that week, coffee steaming in their hands, the winter air sharp but kind. "I still love you," Logan said quietly, his eyes searching hers. "I know," Victoria said, her gaze steady. "But I love me too, and I won't forget what it took to get here." He nodded, accepting her truth. Maybe one day, he asked, his voice a whisper. Maybe, she said, her smile faint, but real. But not because you showed up. Because we both grew into people Noah can admire. Victoria wrote in her journal that night, her words a quiet reckoning. "Forgiveness isn't a door you open once. It's a gate you maintain. Co-parenting isn't about rekindling romance. It's about building something whole for our son, even if it's not what we imagined." She closed the journal, kissed Noah's forehead, and looked out at the Harlem night. The stars faint, but steady. If you've ever found strength in letting go, in choosing peace over pain, drop resilient in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to know that love, real love, starts with healing yourself first.